All right, so in this video, we're going to talk about individual health insurance plans. So this would be a health insurance plan that is not purchased through a group, so not through your employer, but just purchased by you. And normally, and if you're doing something like that, this is probably going to be a bit more expensive. And we'll talk about why here in a moment. So when you would wind up doing this is possibly you don't have a group plan available, right? So if you don't have a group plan available, maybe you're a little entrepreneur, you're starting your own little business, you don't have another job. And so it's not necessarily a situation where you're doing a group plan because you have no employees or anything. It's just you, your little entrepreneurial endeavor. So maybe you're buying your individual health insurance. So if that's the case, you could wind up in this category, or possibly you could buy an individual health insurance plan to kind of supplement what you already have. So if you already have health insurance, perhaps through a group plan, but you evaluate those coverages, those current coverages, and what needs you specifically have, and you kind of conclude, you know what, there's some gaps here, and I really need some coverage in certain other areas that I'm not really getting currently, then maybe you wind up buying an individual health plan or an individual health insurance policy to kind of cover some of those gaps. So that's one reason you could wind up doing it as well. Now, typically, this is going to be more costly than buying insurance through a group plan. And part of the reason for that, if you go back to the video about group plans, one of the things that I mentioned in there was that group plan costs are based on, or premiums are based on age. So the average age of the group. Well, if you're doing an individual health plan, well, that's not really, you don't get to average out with a whole bunch of other people. And also, we're not looking at the average health of the whole group. We're just looking at whatever your health is. So you don't get to average out some of those features. It's just going to be based on kind of what you look like. Now, with that in mind, exclusions due to pre-existing conditions are prohibited at this point. So in other words, if you have a pre-existing condition, the insurance company can't turn you down. But if you think about this, back to the original basic kind of concept of sort of how insurance works, it was all about a probability of something occurring, right? So there's a possibility of bad financial outcomes. And so the insurance company evaluated the possibility relative to the expense of those outcomes and then charged you accordingly, plus some for a profit, right? Well, if you already have a pre-existing condition, under current law, they can't exclude you due to that pre-existing condition. But if you think about the likely effect of this on cost, you're going to look a lot more expensive to the insurance company. So if you are already, let's say you were already diagnosed with cancer or something, they can't exclude you due to those pre-existing conditions. But think about the cost you would add to the insurer, which would be a lot higher due to that pre-existing condition, which probably means, realistically speaking, the likely effect on the cost of this policy is probably going to push the cost of this policy up a bit, right? So from that standpoint, it's kind of an interesting, interesting balance there. On the one hand, they can't reject you due to pre-existing conditions, but if insurance companies are constantly having to basically issue policies to people who have a whole bunch of pre-existing conditions, well, that's going to make their pool of insured individuals, on average, more costly to the insurance company, and therefore they're going to have to charge more across the board. So something to think about there. Okay, types of policies. So if I look at types of policies, you can have sort of a major medical policy for individual health insurance, and this is basically the idea that's covering, most of your medical kinds of stuff. So that's kind of like if you were buying a more complete medical insurance package as an individual, that's more the type of policy you'd be looking for. And that's going to have the same kind of deductibles, co-insurance, out-of-pocket maximums, all those kinds of things that we've talked about previously with group plans and other kinds of plans and so forth. So those would typically have those same kinds of things. You could also possibly, at an individual level, and this wouldn't necessarily qualify as sort of a full healthcare plan under the law, but it might help with certain scenarios, would be a basic medical expense and insurance. So it's not covering all the stuff. It's just covering some real basics. And in that case, they're often very low on what they will cover. So the limits on what they'll cover are often very low. And so it's limited and basic, basically. So probably that would not be the best policy to have And you might only be looking at something like that if you fell into some categories where, from an affordability standpoint, like you literally could not afford anything else, it might be better than nothing, kind of a thing. But probably, not a real good option in general. Okay. Okay. Hopefully that gives you sort of a little bit of an idea of why you would be looking at an individual health insurance plan. And the fact is probably a little bit more costly typically than through a group plan, and some of the categories there. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.